So I was talking recently with Khordmaster, who is a YouTuber, friend of the channel, and he had seen my video about the MPC Key 37, or at least saw that I posted one, and he asked me to rate it on a scale of 1 to 10. Kind of jokingly, he's like, all right, so what's the number on a scale of 1 to 10? And if you've watched my channel for a while, you might have noticed I don't really do that. I don't really rank gear on a scale of 1 to 10, like a numerical or alphabetical scale. I usually just talk about what I like or what I don't like. And at first I had a resistance to the idea of even giving a score. So then Khordmaster, Kevin, he says, oh, so it's an 8.75. And that didn't sit right with me. That didn't feel right. I knew it, I didn't want to give it a numerical score, but I knew it was better than an 8.75. And so I responded kind of off the cuff, well, every MPC is at least a 9. And that's kind of what this video is about. The MPC Key 37, the MPC Live, Live 2, MPC 1, MPC 1 Plus, the Key 61. The only MPC I haven't tried of the modern era is the X and the XSE. But those have essentially the same or better hardware as every other one. Give you a bigger screen, more Q links, and by all accounts seem like awesome beefy machines as well. So although I haven't used those ones, I do feel pretty confident saying that every MPC, at least the modern Akai MPCs, is a 9 out of 10, with the asterisk of I haven't tried the X. And so I want to talk about why I think the MPCs are fairly exceptional in their field. And I think it comes down to a few things. And apologies if some of this is stuff I've talked about before. It might be, but I hope some of this is new, or at least the thesis is new. And the idea here is essentially that there is so much flexibility, so much power in these devices, especially for the cost. You see, there's a lot of music gear out there, and there's a huge variety of prices, and there's a variety of prices on the MPCs as well, but at the end of the day, whether you get the original MPC 1 used for $400 or a brand new MPC XSE for, I want to say like $1,800, maybe more. Again, I haven't used it, apologies. You're getting a device that has essentially the same processor, that runs the same plugins, that has some of the same capabilities. Of course, give or take a SATA drive or an SD card slot on some of the MPCs. And some of them are going to have keys, some of them won't, some of them will have more Q links, some of them will have less. But all of these devices are fully capable of making amazing beats and amazing songs, and having that kind of unilateral processing speed, having that same target spec is what makes this platform a 9 out of 10 for me. The fact you can load the plugins that come with it, that you can buy some of them that have those extra plugins, or you can buy the extra plugins yourself. The fact that you can ignore the plugins entirely and just focus on key groups and samples and drum kits. There are plenty of people who use MPCs that will say the plugins don't count, that these aren't even designed for that. I would disagree. I would say in the modern era of MPCs, the plugins designed by Air are valid and part of the ecosystem, but they are right that you can completely ignore it, and you don't have to just be making boom bap beats or sampling hip hop, which is an awesome and essential function of MPCs. But you can make any genre of music using sampling, using key groups, using just taking an individual one-shot sample, spreading it across the keys, adding a few of the free built-in effects, and making a totally new sound. I was thinking about this especially this week as I exported out a song I actually already made a video about, or at least a beat I'd already made a video about. I took the stems out, exported it onto the USB drive that I used to host the plugins and my samples, etc. And then I went into my computer, took the stems out, and then put them into Ableton, recorded some vocals over it in Ableton, and had a demo I was really happy with. Here's a snippet of that. Just say I'm gonna dream. I'll just tell you what I mean, 'cause I'm fine. I hope that sounded good. I was pretending it's playing. It's not actually playing right now. And this is not the only device that can do similar things, right? The Machine Plus is probably the closest analog, but there's also the Akai Force, which is made by Akai, so it shares some of the same workflow and plugins, but it loses some of the capabilities of this device and then has some capabilities of its own. If you never want to touch a computer, and if you want to build out entire songs in an arranger mode, if you want 64 pads, if you want twice the Q links with their own OLED screens, I think the Force is still a great device. But I do tend to prefer the MPCs lately, and that might be because I also have an Ableton Push 3, which is like a super Force at this point, minus a few features. Outside of that, you have things like the Roland MC707, which is a little long in the tooth and a little limited, but has some really great sounding synths. and samples. You've got the Electron devices, which I don't really feel like necessarily compete in the same way. They kind of feel like they're in their own lane, like on the spectrum of DAW in a box to hardware Groovebox or just hardware in general. I think Electron's over here, MPC is over here, but there's some overlap if you want a sampler. If you want a synth sampler combo, you could put a Digitact and a Digitone next to each other, but at that point, you're creeping into the territory of, I would just recommend getting the MPC-1 or the MPC-1 Plus or the Key 37. I talked about this in my last MPC Key 37 video, but to me, this is like the Goldilocks device on the market right now. Of course, if you want all of the available software plugins, there is an additional cost, and it doesn't have a SATA drive bay, if that's something you want, which is fair. But I will say the SD card slot and the USB port on the back are definitely enough for everything I could want to do. But if you do want to throw a huge SATA drive in there, and you can't do that on this one. So super fair. If that's something you want, this one doesn't have it. But to me, what they chose to include and what they chose not to include makes this one in particular, the Goldilocks device, probably my favorite MPC that's ever been made. But plenty of commenters pointed out, well, actually, I want portability, so I want a battery, and I want a speaker, so they want the MPC Live 2, which is still a fantastic device. You can plug a keyboard into that, run the same plugins, and you can put a SATA drive in that one. Maybe someone wants 61 keys and they want as many of those plugins included as they can get. At that point, the 61 makes a lot of sense, the Key 61 that is. But to me, if you're not even just a brand new person in the space, but if you're just looking for the best value for your dollar for how much you get, I still think the 37 is the winner. I have commenters who will point out that this is basically the only suite of devices that has a dedicated vocal suite, and now of course other devices like Machine Plus or the Push, they do let you record vocals into them, but this one has a real-time pitch correction, a harmonizer, a vocoder, and a bunch of other plugins and effects that you can use to modulate your voice or external audio. I have seen in my comments people saying that there's a recording limit. I've actually not run into that or found that before. That is something to consider and may be detrimental. Again, they're not perfect. That's why they're a 9 out of 10, not a 10 out of 10. In my opinion, there's not a 10 out of 10 device on the market. Some of them are really, really good, but really expensive, like the Ableton Push 3, which also is missing some stuff, so it's not just the price holding it back. And some devices, while very cheap, also usually have less capability, and that lack of capability in a vacuum is okay, especially if you're just hoping to make some stuff and save some money. But when you start comparing everything in the sphere or in the ecosystem of potential options, that's where the value of the MPCs to me seems pretty high. Now I can see how this video will probably end up sounding like a shill video. So I do want to highlight that there are some weird limitations. I do think that the RAM limitation, if you look at everything, is kind of weird. The fact that even a brand new device like this only has 2 gigs. I talked about it in the last video. I'll talk about it again. It's strange to ship a device with only 2 gigs of RAM right now in 2024. But because the ecosystem is really designed for this spec, it just reminds me of the iPhone. I think I said this in my last video, but it reminds me of the iPhone in like 2015-16, where it would have so little RAM compared to the Android counterparts, but it would be faster and smoother, or at least equivalently fast and smooth, because they knew exactly the hardware they were targeting with the software they were developing. To me, it's similar here. It's the difference between a Machine Plus, which can struggle with 4 gigs, and the MPC Key 37, which flourishes with 2, at least for what I do. I have seen commenters say that they hit the walls with the RAM, they're loading too many plugins, or more plugins than the RAM seems to be able to handle rather, but not more plugins than the machine will let them load, and they're having issues. Again, I've not personally had this problem, but I just want to make people aware of it. Just because I haven't had it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And that would be another reason why these devices are a 9 and not a 10 out of 10. So you might be wondering then, are any other devices a 9 out of 10 or higher in my opinion? I think the Ableton Push 3 gets very close, but in order to get it to the capability that puts it at that level, you're paying $2,000 out of pocket for the standalone, and then you're paying an additional, I want to say like 900, something in the 900 realm for Ableton Suite, so that you get all of the plugins and all of the packs to really take advantage of Ableton in standalone on the Push. Because Suite isn't included, which it definitely should be, it really makes it hard for me to probably even give the Push 3 a 9. Again, because we're talking about value. If money is no concern, this becomes a different conversation, I suppose, but for most people, money is always a concern. So I don't know, it feels weird to just cast that aside when talking about this gear, in my opinion. I will say the other thing I said to Khordmaster after he said, oh, so it's an 8.75 is, you know, the MPCs are all 9 out of 10, but the Machine Plus is probably an 8.75. It is really close to that 9 out of 10, to that A mark, right? But it's missing a few things and it feels a little underloved and a little over limited. I've talked about this before, but it struggles because it's hardware that's weaker than its desktop and laptop counterparts. And because the software and plugins that the Plus is designed to run are designed really to run on even more advanced hardware, it just holds it back. To me, the ideal Machine Plus would be a Machine Plus that could run all of Complete in standalone, including Guitar Rig, Contact and all of the Contact expansions, the Play series, some of the heavier stuff, including a SATA bay or even just built-in flash storage would be nice, and enough RAM, either 8 or even 16 gigs of RAM, to allow that device to basically be like the Native Instruments platform in standalone. That would probably put it more towards a 9.5, depending on the price. But if it included, Complete standard, gave you the machine, and could run all of that in standalone for, let's say, $2,000, that to me would be a 9.5 device. Especially if they added some real-time pitch correction and some other things to help people who want to record vocals and other live audio internally. There are, of course, devices I've disliked that I've talked about. I'm not going to beat a dead horse. There are plenty of devices that are okay, that are probably more like an 8 or 7.5. It's interesting thinking about numerical ranking these devices because it's not really something I've done before, but it is a fun thought exercise. And to me, thinking about that and placing that value proposition, that price to capability proposition in a numerical realm, that's where I start to really hone in on. The MPCs, as far as I've tried them, are all a 9 out of 10 or higher. I do think we're in a pretty golden age of standalone music making devices, especially devices that you can integrate with a computer if you want to, or export your stems out of and then finish your songs on a computer. I tend to have a hybrid workflow. I don't think I'm unique in that way, and I don't make a ton of videos about that. But I almost never finish my songs entirely in hardware. I just really enjoy the process of having a single dedicated device, focusing in on the sounds and hands-on controls, working within the limitations, but also not too limited, to then make something I really enjoy, stem out, take into my DAW, in my case, Ableton, and then finish either a demo or a finalized song from there. What do you think? Am I off the mark? Am I missing huge cons or huge pros on the MPCs? Do you feel like they're a 9? Do you feel like they're a 5? Do you care? I don't know, fair if you don't. I wanna give a huge shout out to everyone who's liked and subscribed to my videos, who's checked out my music on Apple Music, Bandcamp, or Spotify. And again, a huge thank you to Zounds for sending this over. If you are interested in getting this MPC or any MPC, I recommend using my Zounds link. If you don't wanna use my link, I do recommend checking the used market. The used market for MPCs is insane. It really you can see dramatic reduced prices, sometimes 400, 500. So if you want a brand new one, you're worried about like warranty or things like that, then I recommend using my Zounds link. But if you want to save the most money possible, a used MPC-1 on Reverb or eBay or in your local area, oh man, it's a hard to beat value prop. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll see you next week, and I hope you have a wonderful week ahead. Peace.